Welcome to the program. I'm Charlie Rose. This is a special edition of Charlie Rose the Week. Just ahead, writers and their work.
It's just the nature of humanity. We're hopeful. We are hopeful people. We're optimistic. We want to know that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And we want to believe that there's meaning. I mean, why do people turn to religion? We don't like to be in a world that doesn't make any sense. And that's what con artists feed on. They give us stories. They give us hope.
We will have that story and more on what happened and what might happen. Funding for Charlie Rose was provided by the following. And so you began how?
You want resilience.
Is it luck at all, or is it something else?
The need for vigilance.
What's the object lesson here?
Help to amplify their voices.
Tell me the significance of the moment. We begin this week with a look at the news of the week. Here are the sights and sounds of the past 7 days.
A massive earthquake rattles Italy. The mayor's saying about half the town is gone, reduced to piles of rubble. In Turkey, ISIS is being blamed for a horrific attack at a wedding. The bomber was as young as 12 years old.
New concerns over Zika. A government health official is warning the disease could hang around here for a year or two.
President Obama took a tour of flood-damaged areas in Louisiana.
I come here first and foremost to say that the prayers of the entire nation are with everybody.
Questions surround Donald Trump's immigration policy.
Donald Trump denies what appears to be a clear move away from mass deportations. The best clue? Trump doesn't talk about it anymore.
Ryan Lochte and 3 of his teammates could be disciplined for their actions in Brazil.
The FBI has uncovered 15,000 more previously unseen emails.
We've already released, 30,000 plus, so what's a few more?
I don't want to say Hillary is worried about this story blowing up, but today she asked Ryan Lochte to make up another robbery.
With flair and fireworks, the 2016 Olympics came to an end.
U.S. brought home 46 gold medals, 37 silver, and 4 idiots.
A river of people on the run in Taiwan, all chasing a rare Pokemon.
Check out what the British Olympic team had to go through, an unforeseen side effect of issuing everyone the same bag.
A seal squeezes its way onto a boat to get away from a pod of killer whales.
Calvin Trillin has been a staff writer at the New Yorker magazine since 1963. He got his start as a journalist covering the civil rights movement in the South. His new book is called Jackson, 1964. It's a collection of 5 decades of his reporting on race in America.
I think it's around the society, and sometimes it isn't obvious. I mean, look at the birther business, where I think Bernie Sanders described that very well. He said, President Obama's father was born in Kenya and my father was born in Poland. Nobody's demanded to see my birth certificate. I mean, what is that? That is underlying racism, and it's occasionally something happens, and as I say in the beginning of the book, often people just take it for granted.
This is 4 decades, 50 years of reporting. How have we changed in a sense? I mean, clearly things are better. In part,
things are definitely.
The president
better,
says that,
but he's right. I mean, and things are. I mean, when I went to Jackson for the 50th commemoration of the Freedom Rides, both the police chief and the mayor were African Americans. That wouldn't have happened. I mean, there's some obvious things. I went to get my car serviced the other day, and I didn't deal with anybody who was just a regular white person. There were people of color of one sort or another. The jobs, I mean, things have progressed, but then you have, say, voting laws passed now that are not just in Mississippi, but in Pennsylvania, that are obviously meant to keep black people from voting. You don't get your house burned down for trying to vote, but you get standing in a long line asking for identification that you don't have.
When you set out to write this, I mean, you were drawn back to race, or was there some precipitating thing or moment? Other than your editor say it's time for another book.
I've been in the last few years visiting an NYU classroom. The professor, Robert Cohn, used to teach at the University of Georgia, and his field is civil rights and race relations. And he suggested that I put these pieces together for a book. I mean, put some of the pieces together. There are a lot more of them than that. And I thought I had actually never thought of that. So I did what the professor said.
You wrote a book.
I wrote a book.
Yeah, good for you and good for
Right.
us. You also reported on and befriended Charlene Hunter, now Charlene Hunter Gall, when she was a student at the University of Georgia.
Right. That was a book-length piece, so it's not in this book because I didn't want to excerpt it. But as I mentioned before, and I think I mentioned in the introduction, I think there was a moment covering that story that made me think I was finally beginning to understand what was going on. Charlene was in a dorm full of sort of hostile co-eds, and we talked quite a bit on the phone.
Right.
I was in Atlanta then for Time magazine, and she mentioned once that she had come back from Savannah in the train. It was a terrible trip, and I said, I thought that was supposed to be a great train, the Nancy Hanks it was called.
Yeah.
And she said, well, you know, not where we have to sit. And all of my knowledge and experience in the South, of all my reading of Plessy versus Ferguson and the distinction between interstate and intrastate transportation, it just drained away. And I thought, they can't make her sit back there. And I realized it's not theoretical, it's personal.
Right.
And for African Americans in Georgia at that time, it was personal every day, and to some extent it still is.
It's a long burden. It's a long burden of history for her.
It is a long burden, and I'm optimistic in the sense that I look back on these years and look back on particularly being in Mississippi or some place like that, and I think, well, we've come a long way since then.
Sure.
In a lot of different ways, but we've come a long way in race, but we still have a very long way to go. It seems like 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Maria Konnikova writes often about psychology and culture. Her last book was called The Confidence Game, Why We Fall For It Every Time. It explored the minds and methods of con artists and the science of gullibility. We should tell them, shouldn't we?
We should.
All right.
We should.
This brilliant young woman worked at this television program as a producer for me and made the program better. Having said that, nothing that she has achieved surprises me. You went to Columbia, got a PhD in psychology.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Because I'm just fascinated by the way the mind works.
All right.
And one of the things
And why we do what we do.
And why we do what we do. Exactly. The motivations behind it. I think a lot of the motivations that make you so good at what you do. You know, why do people, what are their motivations?
Right.
What makes them tick?
Right.
What is inside the human mind? And, you know, one of the things that really made me realize how much I wanted to go deeper into that was the science series and the brain series.
Oh, yeah, which you worked on here and
yes.
set up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but the interesting thing about that, too, is, I mean, did you always want to be a writer, and you just wanted to learn something about psychology, and that seemed the easiest way to do it?
Right. That's exactly right. I have always wanted to be a writer, and I think that writing and psychology have so much in common, because to write well, you really have to understand human motivation. You have to understand people. That's the only way you can craft characters and narratives that really make sense. And so to me, that was a very natural fit, a very natural combination. Yes.
What was it about the confidence game that attracted you?
You know, I am just blown away by the fact that we, all of us, no matter how smart we are, how skeptical we are, how, you know, intelligent, scientists, physicists, it doesn't matter, journalists, how incredibly vulnerable we are in the right circumstance to being fooled, even though we think we aren't. And I wanted to explore that. You know, why do incredibly smart people become victims of confidence artists? How do they do it? What is it about them?
Okay, start with that. Why do incredibly smart people become victims of confidence games?
Well, I think it's 2 things. The first is just the nature of humanity. We're hopeful. We are hopeful people. We're optimistic. We want to know that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And we want to believe that there's meaning. I mean, why do people turn to religion? We don't like to be in a world that doesn't make any sense. And that's what con artists feed on. They give us stories. They give us hope. They tell us the story, the version of the world that we want to see.
And how do they come to know all that?
They are incredibly good psychologists, intuitive psychologists. So they look at you and they can read all of the signs that you're giving off. They do their homework. They can figure out what motivates you. There's an entire part of the confidence game called the put-up. And all of that entails basically learning about the person. So what are your weak points? What are your motivations? What are your hopes? What are your dreams? What makes you tick? And they're so good at doing that that they can then push your buttons. Victor Lustig is one of the most famous con artists of the 20th century. He sold the Eiffel Tower twice, and he conned Al Capone, which is
really? So how did he con Al Capone?
So he came up to
a lot of stories like that in this book, by the way.
So he came up to Al Capone And Al Capone says, I know exactly who you are. He had a reputation. Yeah, he had a reputation by this point. He was called Count Lustig. And he said, I have a business proposition for you. If you give me $20,000, I am going to double it for you within the next 2 months.
Yeah, Lustig said that to Capone.
Yes. So he gave him that proposition. And Capone said, all right, fine. Do it. Here's the
20.
money. Right. Exactly. Because no one messes with Al Capone, right? If you mess with Al Capone, you're not going to be dead. You're not going to be alive for very long. So what happens is Lustig goes and puts that money in a safety deposit box and goes back to New York, which is where he's from, and goes about his business. 2 months later, comes back with the cash in hand and says, you know what? I'm really sorry, I failed. So I thought I had a really good deal, and I really need the cash myself, but I wasn't able to do it, so here's your money back. And Capone said, oh my God, I was expecting either nothing or double my cash because of your shady dealings, but by God, you're honest, and I'm going to reward you for your honesty. Here's $5,000 just for being honest. And
so Al Capone.
So that's what Lustig wanted all along.
They're viewed as the aristocrats of crime.
Yes, that's a term that was coined by David Moorer, who was a brilliant writer in 1940, The Big Con. And I think that it's so apt that con artists, first of all, they're artists and they're aristocrats, because what they do is soft craft. They don't break into your house and steal something. They convince you to give them your trust, your confidence. That's the origin of the
when we
term.
see movies like Ocean's 11 and all that, I mean, these are people who have con artist qualities.
Yes.
But we call that a con game if, in fact, they're, it's a caper.
It is a caper, but I think Ocean's 11 is about con artists as well, because they deceive and they use the soft skills when they're actually committing the crime.
The political gridlock in Washington, the Syrian refugee crisis, Britain's exit from the European Union. Are these unrelated events? Not to the Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Tom Friedman. He sees them as a result of global trends that are outpacing our political systems. Trends he calls accelerations.
My argument, Charlie, is we're in the middle of actually 3 accelerations all at the same time, each feeding off the other. More and Moore's law drives more globalization drives more climate change, and more solutions to both. And I believe these 3 accelerations, they're just changing the world. They're really transforming and reshaping everything. They're reshaping politics, they're reshaping geopolitics, they're reshaping the workplace, and they're reshaping really our ethical and moral choices.
Put that in context, because it's a big idea.
Yes.
Of starting with the 2016 election.
Great. So let's talk about the sort of the political and geopolitical impact. This is how I look at things. So these, I think what these accelerations are doing is that they are actually exploding weak states, and they're exploding the politics of strong states. So what do I mean? There's a whole set of states whose borders are primarily straight lines. In my view, these are deeply artificial states that were propped up by the Cold War. In the Cold War, you had 2 superpowers to throw money at them. The Cold War was a good time to be a kind of flimsy little state. Now you take all of that away. Climate change is here, much more population. China now can take all your low-wage labor. And what you see is a lot of these states can't make it. Now, some we've tipped over. In the case of Iraq, some Syria, they tipped themselves over. But you go through these states whose borders are primarily straight lines. They're the most artificial. Charlie, they're like caravan homes in a trailer park. They're built on a slab of cement with no basement and no foundation. And what these accelerations are, they're like a hurricane going through a trailer park. Libya, Syria, Yemen, Chad, Mali, Niger. I've been to Niger and Senegal recently. All of these weak states, they're basically being exploded by these forces. What they're doing is...
And they had no institutional government, no
exactly.
rule of law, no...
They all very, very thin. Right. But they could get by in the Cold War because we educated kids, we sent them money, we built their armies. That's all gone now. So what's going on is, on the one hand, that's really changing the geopolitics. So the new divide in the world, because of these collapsing states, is no longer east-west, north-south, communist, capitalist. The new divide in the world is between the world of order and the world of disorder. And the dividing line now is the Mediterranean. What it's doing to strong states is it's stressing out their politics, because their political parties, ours, Britain's, you see it going on everywhere now, their political parties are really designed to answer questions of the Cold War, the Industrial Revolution, and the New Deal. But the questions of the day are, how do you respond to these accelerations, what they're doing to your climate, what they're doing to globalization and trade and its impact on you, and what they're doing to your workplace. And because these parties, just to finish this thought, because these parties really can't answer those questions in the way they're presently constructed, they're blowing up. We've had gridlock, and worse than that, now we're seeing these parties collapse, basically, because
both the Republican and the Democrat.
Well, wait, I mean, Trump blew up. The Republicans went first because they were like a untended garden, basically, and Trump was an invasive species that came in because they just let the garden go fallow. The party stopped thinking and basically rented out itself to whoever could energize their base. So when Sarah Palin, Rush Limbaugh, whoever came along who had energized their base, so they could get elected. elected in order to be in power, in order to get elected. I mean, they completely lost their way, in my view. I mean, if a party could declare moral bankruptcy, they'd be in Chapter 11, the Republicans. There's no question in my mind. The Democrats, well, they've broken up in a certain way, too. I mean, Bernie Sanders, let's remember, is an independent. He's basically made off with half the party, or just under half. And now we see the British Labour Party and the Tories both blowing up. And so I think we're at the beginning of an incredible reshaping.
So you think there will be, in fact, a reshaping will lead to fourth parties, people who try to build a new constituency?
I think we're in the beginning of that, because these accelerations, to me, they are the heart of what is going on now. And if you don't design policies that get the best out of them and cushion the worst, you're not going to be able to serve voters.
Andrew Solomon is an author and lecturer on psychology, politics, and culture. His last book was called Far and Away, Reporting from the Brink of Change, 7 Continents, 25 Years.
I believe that travel is really a moral imperative, and that we live in a globalized world. Some people don't like that, but it's true. And that when we close ourselves off from other places and don't encounter them and don't experience them, we don't understand the world we're living in, and we have a lot of unnecessary fear and a lot of ultimately serious dysfunction as a result.
That's almost an essential truth about relationships, or to say in the expression once that, you know, never criticize somebody until you've walked a mile in their moccasins.
And Jung said he said, if you do not know someone, you are likely to regard him as a fool. And I think if you don't know a place, you're likely to regard it as ridiculous. And when you start encountering places, suddenly the world opens up to you.
What has it done for you?
I think it's made me more aware of what is American and what is universal. I have an ability to distinguish between those. It's also given me a sense that a lot of the places that we see as sinister and threatening are actually places where people are full of hope for making things better. And that when we talk about our enemies and we talk about the chaos in the world and we talk about building walls to keep immigrants out of our country and so on, it's based on a real misunderstanding of what the gentleness is and the kindness that can be found as you encounter other places.
With all the wisdom that you have acquired, how do you travel today? I mean, what's a journey for you about?
Well, I sometimes draw a distinction between tourism and travel, and I think I grew up as a tourist with my family, and I've tried to become a traveler. So
Tell me what that means.
Well, to meet people, to look at what's working in their system, to look at what isn't working, to stand with them shoulder to shoulder. I stood in a line protesting against tanks in Moscow during the fall of the Soviet Union. I helped bring artists together in Afghanistan when I was reporting there. It's to bring together the people who might not otherwise be brought together and to help to amplify their voices. Aung San Suu Kyi once said, please use your liberty to promote ours. And I think that's a responsibility we have.
Cash Sunstein is the former head of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. He is also a prolific writer. His latest book made the New York Times bestseller list. It is called The World According to Star Wars.
There are these myths and religions in multiple cultures that kind of spring out of people's minds as well as traditions. And George Lucas and the saga gets at them and gives them a kind of all-American twist.
Right.
All about freedom of choice under difficult conditions. And so he makes new and kind of modern and something that really resonates in America but elsewhere.
You say fathers, freedom, attachment, redemption are at the core of the saga.
Yeah. So to speak of freedom, what the movies say, and even the Sith, the evildoers in the saga, respect is that the path you go, it's up to you. If you want to be a good person tomorrow, or if you want to go back and save your buddy who's at risk, even though you're a rogue and a smuggler, you can choose to do that. If you want, in the end, to...
But that's biblical.
It is a biblical idea. I think the way it resonates in Star Wars has a theme that is modern. It has to do with our specific culture. And the freedom idea is very closely connected with redemption, because even if you're the worst person in the galaxy, as Darth Vader almost was, you can be the one who restores balance to the Force, and you can save your soul.
You also suggest, and it's fascinating, that there are certain prisms you can look through. In Buddhism, terrorism, technology.
All of them are there. So Darth Vader is...
And more.
Absolutely. Christianity is there. Freud is very much there.
Yeah.
With Anakin Skywalker loses his mother. He falls in love with someone who's a lot older, who says, you'll always be a little boy to me. There's a Freudian echo. There's clearly echoes of the Christ tale, both for Anakin and for Luke. I think there's a political theme about republicanism, and of course the word is republic, about the need for vigilance against authority, and that reading is there. There are also crazy readings. They're all over the internet, and though they are crazy, they're often ingenious, and art often lends itself to multiple interpretations, and somehow this cartoonish saga is able to have sufficient richness that, like Shakespeare or James Joyce, you can go a lot of places with it.
Have you talked to J.J. Abrams about this?
I have told him, but I think the last thing he needs is to be questioned by a law professor about what his intentions were, so he knows about it. But
he's the film director for the latest, The Force Awakens. And what about George?
I've talked to him about American foreign policy. I have not talked to him about this book.
But how could you resist?
Well, I think he goes about his life, and probably a lot of people ask him, what did you mean with...
Including moi.
Yeah, and so I met him once at a large party, and I think someone mentioned that I was writing a book on Star Wars, and I think that did not make him extremely excited about talking to me. But then he was informed that I had worked in the Obama administration and had worked on some of the surveillance issues after the Soviet
All of a sudden you had his interest.
And he wanted to talk about that. So he's a person of great focus and kind of presence, and that probably helped make him produce these amazing movies, but also helps keep him a very curious person.
Here's a look at the week ahead. Sunday is the 33rd Annual MTV Video Music Awards. The show is in New York's Madison Square Garden. Monday is the first day of the U.S. Open Tennis Championships in Flushing, New York. Tuesday is the day the Academy of Country Music Honors are presented in Nashville, Tennessee. Wednesday is the opening day of the Venice International Film Festival. Thursday is the day the BMI R&B Hip Hop Awards are presented in Atlanta. Friday is the day President Obama leaves on a visit to China and Laos. Saturday is the qualifying round of the Italian Grand Prix. And here is what's new for your weekend. The 30th Annual Burning Man Festival opens in Black Rock City, Nevada. Matthew McConaughey, Ken Watanabe, and Naomi Watts are in theaters with Sea of Trees.
We can go back there whenever you want to. Promise me? I promise. Do you love more than anything on earth?
And Britney Spears releases a new album, Glory. That's Charlie Rose the Week for this week. For all of us here, thank you so much for watching. I'm Charlie Rose. We'll see you next time.